Hi, this is Simon Obstill. Welcome to part 2 of this tutorial in which we're looking at creating this realistic rain scene. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already done so. Otherwise, not a lot of this is going to make much sense to you. Okay, so we're going to create another displacement effect, and that is going to be the effect of the droplets that fire upwards as the raindrop hits the surface. So obviously we've got these outward ripples, but they're not creating that sort of upward displace that you'd get from a raindrop hitting the surface. So to do this, I've made another new project, and again, I've made it 200 by 200. And I'm going to make the duration 1 second and 12 frames. So 24 frames a second, 1 second and 12 frames duration. And I'm going to import, again, that drop element that we used for the rain. And I'm going to come to make particles, or you can hit E on the keyboard. We're going to choose circle for the shape. We're going to use outline for the arrangement. And we'll have a radius of 30. Let's switch to 3D. Let's zero out the emission longitude, and for the range, let's have 40. And let's turn off face camera. So I'm going to keyframe the birth rate. So at frame 3, hit a keyframe, set that to 2000. I'm going to step forward 1 frame and set that down to 0. So it's only emitting for those first 3 frames and then not emitting at all. So the life we can reduce to 1.5 because that's the duration of our sequence. We can open up the opacity here, opacity over life, set a keyframe at the end there and set that opacity down to 0 so they'll fade off over their life. Let's set the scale to 20% and let's adjust the speed. So speed we'll set to 200 and speed randomness also to 200. What I also want to do here is I want to add a behavior, so particles scale over life, and I'm going to use the custom scale so I can control it manually. And round about here, around about 20%, I'm going to just alt-click to create a new keyframe on this graph. So let's set that over life value to be exactly 20%, and let's set that custom scale there to be 75%. So that first, it's scaling from 0, and we want to scale back down to 0. So select that last set of keyframes and set that down to 0. So over life, they're going to scale from 0 up to 75% and down again to 0. Let's come to the transform and set an X rotation of -75. And you'll hopefully see, actually zoom out, it's probably easier to see if I zoom out. You'll see that we're sort of emitting from this ring, this angled ring, upwards. At the moment they just go upwards out forever, but we're going to fix that by adding another couple of behaviors. So first of all, we're going to add simulation gravity, and we're going to set that gravity amount to 700. And that means they're going to be pulled downwards, but we don't want to be pulled out of frame. I want to find a way of keeping them within the frame as they fall. I know that sounds bizarre, but you'll see what I mean. So we're going to add another behavior, simulations wind, and let's open up the velocity, and we're going to target the y value and have a value of 400. And I think now, hopefully, you'll see that they fire up, but they also stay within the frame, and that's what I want to do. I wonder whether I might just have them, I'm just going to experiment, I don't think this is going to work, with the emitter just have a wider emission range, so they fire out more to the side. Let's maybe even go for 50. That's probably quite good. Maybe down to 45, just play safe. Okay, so now we've got our extra element, and what we can do is we can again render it out. So share, export movie, we're going to call this splash, and we're going to save it. ProRes proxy is going to be fine. Again, we'll fix the opacity, we'll fix the transparency later on, and render that out to our assets folder. So now we're back in our main project and we can import the element we've just made. So I'm going to make a new group, Command-Shift-N, import, and we call that splash, if you remember. So import that, and that's looking like that. What we're going to do is we're going to copy the emitter that we made for the ripples. So I'm going to alt drag that, and I'm going to take the color solid as well because we need that. So I'm going to take both of those, that's command clicking them, and alt drag them into my splash group here. And then what I can do is I can take that splash element and drag it into the particle cell like so. I'm going to call that splash so it's not confusing to look at. And also let's call this emitter splash like that. So now they're basically in sync with each other. But what I want to do here is I want to turn on face camera with this one so they fire upwards. Now they're way, way too big, so we need to fix that. And the way we're going to fix that is by coming to the splash element, which we need to have turned off. And let's set its scale down to, I think, 20%. So now they're much more modest. So now we can turn off this group and we can look at using it to displace the scene. So I'm going to make a group above that latest one, which was the ripples one. So Command-Shift-N. Again, I'm going to make that 3D, and I'm going to drop everything from below into it. We can close that up. And to this top group, I'm going to add distortion bump map, and we can use splashes. No, we can't. We need to have set it to fixed resolution first, which I haven't done. Splashes as the source, and come to the bump map and drag it into the source well there. I think what I'm going to do is turn that up to 1 so we get the effect of it, and just adjust its angle, I think. So if we go to the -180, getting a bit more of the effect. If I turn that on and off, it's just adding a little bit of extra visual interest. It doesn't, it's not right in your face, but you definitely sort of get a sense of more activity going on with those little splashes. We probably see it if we zoom right in. So if I turn it off, it's creating these little droplets, and that's just, in the overall scheme of things, that's just going to add value, I think. One thing we might want to do, though, while we're at this, is to have a look at these ripples. And now they're very sort of sharp because we didn't do any kind of softening of them at the time. So we can come into that ripples group and take that ripple element and come to filters and add a Gaussian blur. And we can probably go quite high, something like 16 or something with that. And that just makes them a little bit more sort of, so if I turn that off, a little bit more realistic, a little bit more rounded. I might go with that. You don't want to make it too oily, so maybe just I don't know, 12, even 10. But I just think softening that off a bit just helps to make it look a little bit more natural. Now, there's another thing we could do with our splashes, just to bring them out a little bit more if we felt that's what we wanted to do. So I'm going to duplicate that splashes group, and I'm going to call it splashes overlay. And I can turn that on and then come to properties and set its blend mode to color dodge. Now I want to put this down behind the main text because I don't want it going over the text. Oops, not in there, underneath in there. And you can see that that's now very strong. We can just dial that back just to get the benefit of that just slight extra brightness on them. So, maybe 30% or something. Just helps to pull them out a little bit more, makes them look a bit brighter and shinier. So there's quite a bit left still to get through. We want to add some lighting. We want to add a camera, which is going to be an interesting process. And we also want to, once we've done that, add some surface tension around the bottom of these letters. And that's going to be a really fun technique. But there's one thing I want to do before we move on to that, and that's correct a mistake I made. I made a copy, a duplicate of the text, when actually what I wanted to do was make a clone so that the text would update if we wanted to change it. So I'm going to make a clone of this main text, and I'm going to drag it down into that text reflection group there. And we just need to fix it. So rotate it through 180 degrees on X. And we had that little adjustment, so 6 and -1, 2, 3, didn't we there? So +6 on X, -1, 2, 3 on Y to sit it. Actually, I'm going to pull it away a little bit more. So yeah, somewhere there. So now if we edit the main text, so we can say damp or whatever, the reflection will update, and that's a better way of doing it. So let's go back to rain. So next I'd like to add a light, and that's going to create some issues that we need to resolve. So add object light. Now nothing currently is being affected by that light, but I need to start switching some of these groups. So obviously we want the floor to be affected, so I'll turn that on. I also want to make sure my background is 3D, but not affected by the lights. So I'm just going to come in here and turn off the lighting for the group because we want that to be self-illuminated. And we also want the text reflection to be 3D. So let's turn that on as well. And we need to make that main reflection group 3D. And then obviously we need to isolate the background here. This group, the background group, turn that off because that wants to be self-illuminated as well. And the main text also wants to be 3D because we do want that hit by the light. So let's adjust the light just a little bit. Let's just move it up 100 pixels on Y. And let's adjust its intensity. Let's go for 200. And I want to pick this blue off the background. And then let's make that blue just much less bright. And then I'm going to duplicate that light because we also want to light the reflection in the same way. So if I duplicate that, right-click, duplicate, and just move it to -100, or the lighting on the reflection will look correct. So I've renamed those two lights, light reflection, light main. And I'd also like to do a little bit of treatment to this background image. So I'm going to come to the background image there. I'm going to select color levels, and I'm going to just increase the gamma value up like that, darken it all down, maybe just punch the white a little bit. And then I'm also going to add a glow. So I'm going to use good old Hawaii Super Glow. Add that. I'm going to reduce the number of glows down to 4, I think. That really brings the scene to life. And I'm going to select both of those. I'm going to Alt drag them onto the reflection layer image there. So they work for the foreground as well. So now we've got a much more dramatic and photorealistic looking effect. And I've just done a little tweak there where I've increased the Superglow threshold, so it's only blurring the brightest areas rather than fogging too much of the mid-tones. So now let's come to the question of the camera, and I'm afraid this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So let's add object camera. Initially, everything looks fine. But what we want to do with our camera is we want to start looking down on the scene and then sort of tilt back to this sort of position. So let's start by entering a camera rotation of -45 and watch what happens. Everything goes seriously wrong. So I'm going to do a few things just to simplify it. I'm going to turn off the splashes and ripples displace because we're going to have to deal with those issues separately later. I'm going to leave the waves turned on for now because that gives us a little bit of a feel for it. Okay, so there are a few things we need to still switch to 3D, one of which is the puddle mat group here. So let's switch that to 3D. And the other of which is this background group here inside there. That also needs to be 3D. So now that's looking a little bit more under control. I actually want to, however, just make some adjustments to the scale of the puddle mat. So I'm going to set that to 75, or rather 75 on X, but actually want 65, I think, on Y. And I'm going to adjust that filter. So I made the blacks very, very sort of see-throughs to give us a lot of kind of shine in the back there. But I think I'm just going to bring that down so it just looks a little bit more under control, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the animation of the camera move so we can tie everything into it. So I'm going to start at frame 0 and keyframe that negative 45-degree rotation. I'm going to come to 8 seconds on the timeline, and I'm going to set that to -10. I don't want to be flat on, but I want to be kind of looking something like that. So now that one of the things we obviously need to address is the extrusion, because the extrusion is not performing correctly in relation to the camera. So what we can do is we can take that extrusion and we can just keyframe the distance. So if at 8 seconds we're happy with it, which we are, we can keyframe the distance to be 10. Actually, I'm going to be a little bit more bold than that. I'm going to go for 15. And then we'll come to the start and set that distance to 75. And now the extrusion is looking quite plausible. We need to do the same thing on the reflection extrusion, obviously, as well. So come down into here. We're going to keyframe that at 8 seconds to be 15. And at 0, we're going to set it to 75. So that's already starting to look better. We'll probably also want to turn our rain group to 3D. So let's do that. And just, it's going to kind of move a little bit better with the camera again. And a small thing, I don't really like the edge color now we're seeing it. So I'm going to come to that extrude and just darken this down. Let's just bring that down just so it feels like it fits in a bit more, somewhere like that, I think. Now, the tricky question is what happens with our ripples and our splashes, because obviously our source groups are not 3D. So let me turn on, and I'll show you what happens if I turn on the ripples. You see they're not aligned to the camera correctly. But if I make this group 3D, the whole effect disappears. So it's a thing that you can't actually do. So what I'm actually going to do is something a little bit different, which is to link the rotation of the emitter to the rotation of the camera. So we're going to select the X rotation, add parameter behavior link, and we're going to drag the camera into the object source well. So it's linked, but it's not linked correctly. And we need to adjust, first of all, the scale. So it's actually -1 rather than +1. So it's going the opposite direction. And we also need to adjust the X offset to 90. And now our ripples are actually following the camera correctly. In the previous tutorial, you remember I actually had to render them out as separate elements, but because we've got this easily defined camera move, we can just do that simple linking. So I need to do the same thing with my splashes emitter. So select that, right click on the X rotation, add parameter behavior link, add the camera to the source well, scale of -1 and X offset of 90, and then we can turn those splashes displace on again, and it's all looking a little bit more under control. We could also do the same thing with the noise, so that waves element, noise element, add parameter behavior link, and the camera -1 and offset of 90. So that's everything now together. We will, of course, also need to make that little splash overlay element. This one here, do you remember that splashes overlay? We need to switch that to 3D. That's not actually providing a display source. It can actually travel in 3D along with everything else. So there you go, we're not far off being finished. We do want to have a look at this question of the surface tension around the base of the letters. So above this main text group, I'm going to make object new group. I'm going to make sure it's 2D. And into that, I'm going to put a clone of that main text. So I'm going to clone that text, right-click, make clone layer, pop it into that new group. I'm going to make a new group above that and pop that group into that. And again, this group wants to be 2D and it also wants to be fixed resolution. So what I'm going to do is with this clone layer, come to its properties. I'm going to again link its X rotation to the camera. So let's grab the camera. And what we're going to do is again set the scale to -1. And this time the X offset is going to be 180. So it's flopped. And what we're also going to do is we're going to copy the extrude from that main text onto the text layer group in there. So I've called this enclosing group surface tension, and I'm going to add generators color solid, and I'm going to turn that black, and I'm going to move it to the back of the group. And then I'm also going to duplicate it. So right click, duplicate it, and move it to the front of the group. And then I'm going to come to its Y position and enter a value of -610. And what that gives me is this little slit that shows me just the foot of the letters. And what I can do is come to the group and add a blur, Gaussian blur. Let's set this to 64. Make sure to turn on crop. And then let's also add a color levels. And let's bring the white down to about there for the time being. So now we can turn off this group. And then we can come down into our reflection group. And we want to make a new group between ripples and splashes. So I select the ripples group, add a new group, drag everything below it into that. And to this new group, we're going to add distortion bump map. And we're going to use the surface tension group as the source. And let's turn up the amount to, say, 5. You can see if I turn that on and off, you can see we've created this nice little effect here. What I might just do is adjust that. You can see as we adjust the levels, we can adjust the amount that that's affecting the surface tension. And obviously, again, we can adjust the Gaussian blur as well. So really just do that to taste. But I think you can see we've got this really pretty cool effect where the text looks like it's much more sitting inside the water. We might also, if we're being really fancy, we might animate. We look at this on its own, just animate the position of that mask to make sure it's still there at the end. So if we keyframe that Y value at 0 and come to the 8-second mark and then adjust it so we're still seeing a little bit of that element. So that's about 640. Let's unsolo that. So we're still seeing displacement at the end point as well. Maybe it's a bit too much, but gives you the idea of what you can do. Let's just, what did I say, 640? Let's go for -630 instead. That's probably just enough. So I'd just like to point out that given the way we set everything up, we can come into our main text group and retype that text, adjust its scale, and everything follows along. So now we've got completely different text, but all the elements have actually updated, including that surface tension, to reflect our new text. And one other thing I'd probably do before we go is just to add an extra light at the background. So I would duplicate my main light. Let's push this back, well, push it up to 200 on Y and push it back to -650. And maybe just increase its saturation and its intensity, just so we're getting a bit more of a unity between the background and the foreground. Perhaps increase its fall off as well, just so it's not reaching the size too much. You could also try and pick up some of these other lights as individual little spots, but I think that's probably more than enough for now. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks very much indeed for watching. I know it's been a long one, but hopefully there've been enough useful tips along the way. So hope to see you again another time.